I should have noticed the van sooner. It had been parked across from my apartment for 3 weeks, maybe 4. White, windowless, unremarkable, the kind contractors use. I only paid attention because my neighbor Mrs. Chen mentioned it during one of our awkward elevator encounters. Strange, she said, adjusting her grocery bags. Same van every day. Different spots, but always watching your building. I laughed it off. Paranoid old woman, I thought. But that night, I found myself peeking through my blinds at the empty street below. The van was gone. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I work remotely as a data analyst for a mid-sized insurance company. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would make me interesting to anyone. I live alone in a converted warehouse apartment in Portland's industrial district, the kind of neighborhood that's up and coming, but still feels abandoned after dark. The first real sign something was wrong came with the photos. I found them slipped under my door on a Tuesday morning, 3 printed screenshots from my laptop's webcam. Me working late, the blue glow of my screen illuminating my face. Me eating cereal in my pajamas. Me crying during a video call with my sister about Dad's diagnosis. No note. No demands. Just proof that someone had been watching. I called the police, of course. Officer Martinez, no relation, despite the name, was professional but ultimately useless. Any ex-boyfriends? Co-workers with grudges? Have you posted anything controversial online lately? I hadn't. My social media presence was minimal, my dating life non-existent since the breakup with David 8 months ago. I was boring, invisible, forgettable. That's what made this so terrifying. The locksmith came that afternoon. New deadbolts, a security chain, even one of those rubber door stops. I covered my laptop camera with tape and bought blackout curtains. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I started to relax. Then the emails began. They came from my own address, sent to my own inbox. Subject lines like, "You looked tired yesterday," and "The blue sweater suits you." The messages were always brief, almost conversational. "You should eat more vegetables. That frozen dinner can't be healthy. Your sister calls too much. Maybe you should screen her sometimes." Gmail's security team insisted my account hadn't been compromised. The emails were being sent from my own computer, from my own apartment, while I slept. I bought a cheap security camera and pointed it at my desk. The next morning, there was a new email. "Cute camera. I like how you're taking this seriously now." The footage showed nothing. Just my empty chair and sleeping laptop, the red recording light blinking steadily through the night. That's when I realized whoever was doing this wasn't just watching me. They were inside my system, inside my life, treating it like their personal television show. But the worst part wasn't the invasion of privacy. It was how accurate their observations were becoming. "You've been avoiding your mother's calls again," one email read. "She's worried about you. You should call her back before she starts asking questions you can't answer." They were right. I had been avoiding Mom's calls, letting them go to voicemail while I spiraled deeper into paranoia and insomnia. Another email. "The sleeping pills aren't working anymore, are they? You took 3 last night. That's dangerous, Sarah." I hadn't told anyone about the pills. Asterisk, what happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. Asterisk. The breakthrough came when I decided to play detective myself. If someone was monitoring my every move, they had to be close enough to know my daily routines, my habits, my tiny apartment's layout. I started varying my schedule, taking different routes to the coffee shop, working from the library instead of home. The emails stopped. For 5 blissful days, my inbox remained normal. Work correspondence, spam, nothing from my mysterious watcher. I began to hope it was over. Then I saw him. I was walking back from the library when I noticed a man in a gray hoodie about 30 feet behind me. Nothing unusual. Portland was full of people in hoodies. But when I stopped to tie my shoe, he stopped too, pretending to check his phone. When I turned left instead of right, so did he. My heart hammered as I ducked into a Starbucks and watched through the window. He stood across the street, Not even trying to hide anymore. Medium height, thin build, face obscured by the hood. He looked ordinary. The kind of person you'd never remember seeing. I stayed in the coffee shop for 2 hours. He waited. When I finally worked up the courage to leave through the back exit, I called an Uber and went straight to my sister's house across town. I didn't go home for 3 days. But he found me anyway. Staying at your sister's won't help. The new email read. You can't run from yourself, Sarah. That phrase chilled me more than anything else. Not, you can't run from me. From yourself. Like this was somehow my fault, my creation. I hired a private investigator, a former cop named Frank Russo who specialized in stalking cases. Frank was skeptical at first. Most cyber-stalking cases involved angry ex-partners or online disputes, but the evidence convinced him this was serious. Whoever's doing this has serious technical skills, he said, scrolling through screenshots of the emails. And they're escalating. The personal observations, the physical following. This isn't random harassment. This is obsession. Frank installed better security software on my devices and helped me document everything for a restraining order. The problem was, we still didn't know who we were trying to restrain. That changed when Frank called me at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday. Sarah, you need to come down to the police station. Now. What happened? We found him. The man who's been watching you. Frank's voice was strained. But Sarah, there's something you need to know first. I drove through empty streets in my pajamas, my mind racing through possibilities. Had they caught him in the act? Was he someone I knew? The police station was nearly deserted at that hour, just a few officers and Frank waiting in the lobby. He led me to a small conference room where Detective Morrison was reviewing a file. Ms. Martinez, the detective said, we arrested a man tonight outside your building. David Chin, age 34, unemployed. He was sitting in a car with a laptop, a camera with a telephoto lens, and about 50 printed photographs of you. David Chin. Mrs. Chin from my building. My blood went cold. But here's the thing. Detective Morrison continued. Mr. Chin claims he's been hired to watch you. He says he's been documenting your behavior for someone else. Someone who's been paying him cash to compile a detailed report on your daily activities. Hired by who? Frank and the detective exchanged a look. He says he doesn't know. The payments come through an intermediary, cash payments left in a specific location with typed instructions. He's never met his employer face to face. That's impossible. Who would? Sarah. Frank interrupted gently. There's more. Chin provided us with copies of his reports. Detailed logs of your behavior going back 6 months. Everything's there. Your work schedule, your grocery runs, your sleep patterns, even notes about your emotional state. My mouth went dry. 6 months? But the emails only started 3 weeks ago. Right around the time Chin says his employer requested he escalate from observation to direct contact. The room spun slightly. Someone had been paying to have me watched for half a year before they started this psychological campaign. This wasn't random. This was planned, methodical, purposeful. We need you to think, Sarah. Detective Morrison said. Is there anyone who might want this kind of information about you? An ex-partner, a former employer, a family member with a grudge? I ran through the possibilities, but nothing made sense. My life was aggressively ordinary. I had no enemies, no secrets worth this level of investigation. There's one more thing, Frank said quietly. Chin mentioned that his employer seemed to know things about you that weren't in his reports. Personal details, private conversations. Like they had additional sources of information. Asterisk, this is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. Asterisk. The answer came to me at 4 a.m., sitting in my kitchen with a cup of cold coffee and Detective Morrison's business card. I thought about Frank's words. Additional sources of information. Someone who knew things that couldn't be observed from outside. Someone with access to my private conversations, my personal habits, my family dynamics. Someone I trusted. I opened my laptop and started searching through my email history, my phone records, my social media messages. Looking for patterns, coincidences, anything that might explain how my stalker knew so much. Then I found it. Buried in my Gmail trash folder was an email I'd forgotten about, a message from 3 months ago asking me to beta test a new productivity app. The sender claimed to be from a startup called Mindful Solutions, offering early access to software that would help optimize my work-from-home routine. I downloaded it without thinking. The app ran in the background, supposedly tracking my productivity patterns to offer personalized suggestions. I'd used it for 2 weeks before forgetting about it entirely. But the app was still running. I checked my task manager and there it was. mindfultracker.exe. Consuming minimal resources, recording everything. Every keystroke, every application I used, every website I visited. It had been feeding data to someone for months. My hands shook as I traced the app's network connections. The data wasn't going to any legitimate company. It was being uploaded to a private server registered under a fake business address. But the payment information for the server hosting was real. The credit card belonged to David Kim, my coworker at the insurance company. The quiet guy from the IT department who'd helped me set up my home office equipment when I started working remotely. David, who'd recommended the productivity app during a casual Slack conversation. David, who had access to our company's employee database, including my home address, my salary information, my emergency contacts. David, who sat 3 rows behind me during our monthly office meetings, always friendly, always helpful, always forgettable. I called Detective Morrison immediately. They arrested David Kim at his apartment at 6 a.m. His computer contained terabytes of data, not just mine, but files on 11 other female coworkers. Photos, personal information, detailed behavioral profiles. He'd been running his surveillance operation for over 2 years, using company resources and fake apps to build psychological dossiers on women he'd never even spoken to directly. The hired watcher, David Chen, was just one part of a larger system. Kim had been paying multiple people to conduct physical surveillance while he handled the digital side. He turned stalking into a business model, complete with spreadsheets tracking his subjects, daily routines, and emotional states. When the police searched his apartment, they found printed reports bound in neat binders, each labeled with a woman's name. Mine was the thickest, 347 pages of observations, screenshots, and behavioral analysis spanning 8 months. On his computer, they found draft emails he never sent, including one that explained everything. "You fascinate me, Sarah. Your predictable routines, your carefully controlled emotions, the way you pretend to be satisfied with your small, quiet life. I've been studying you, learning you, and I think it's time you knew how thoroughly you've been understood. You're not invisible anymore. You never will be again." David Kim was sentenced to 18 months in prison and 5 years probation. The other women he'd been stalking pressed charges too. It made the local news. Tech worker arrested in elaborate stalking scheme, but the story disappeared quickly, buried beneath bigger scandals and more sensational crimes. I quit my job and moved to a different city. Changed my phone number, my email address, my social media accounts. Started over with the kind of paranoid security measures that would have seemed insane a year ago. But here's what still keeps me awake. David Kim had those files for 2 years before he escalated to direct contact. 2 years of watching, learning, building detailed profiles of women he never even approached. And in his apartment, police found business cards for a company that didn't exist and a client list with over 40 names. They never found his customers. Sometimes I wonder how many other David Kims are out there, quietly building their databases, selling their surveillance reports to buyers who remain safely anonymous. How many ordinary people are living under microscopes they'll never detect. The van I see parked outside my new apartment is probably just a contractor's vehicle. The man in the coffee shop who seems to show up whenever I do is probably just a regular customer with a similar schedule. Probably. But I've learned that the most terrifying monsters are the ones who look exactly like everyone else, who blend seamlessly into the background of ordinary life. They don't announce themselves with dramatic gestures or obvious threats. They just watch, and wait, and take careful notes. And somewhere out there, someone might still be reading them. The first thing I noticed about Marcus was how he always knew exactly what to say. When I moved into apartment 4B last September, he appeared at my door within an hour with homemade cookies and a warm smile. "Welcome to the building, Emma. I'm Marcus from 4A. If you need anything, and I mean anything, just knock." He was maybe 35, clean-cut in that generic way that made him instantly forgettable. The kind of neighbor you'd want: quiet, helpful, respectful. When my internet went down during my first week of working from home, Marcus offered his Wi-Fi password without being asked. When I mentioned struggling to find good takeout in the area, he had a handwritten list ready the next morning. Perfect timing. Perfect solutions. Perfect neighbor. I should have found it strange how perfectly he anticipated my needs. My name is Emma Chun, and I'm a freelance graphic designer who moved to Chicago after a messy breakup in Denver. The apartment was cheap for a reason. The building was old, the neighborhood transitional, and most of the other tenants kept to themselves. Marcus was the exception. He made living there feel less lonely. We'd run into each other in the hallway maybe 3 times a week. He always asked thoughtful questions about my work, remembered details from previous conversations, offered help with everything from groceries to tech problems. After 2 months, we developed an easy friendship built on casual encounters and small kindnesses. That's why it felt natural when he started texting me. It began innocently enough. "Hey, saw you got a package delivered while you were out. I signed for it and left it by your door." Then, "Power's flickering in my unit. Is yours doing the same?" Practical, neighborly messages that made sense. But gradually, the texts became more frequent and personal. "Hope your client meeting went well today. That new coffee shop you mentioned trying is having a grand opening sale. Rough day? You looked tired when you came home." The last one made me pause. I hadn't mentioned having a rough day, and I'd come home after 9 p.m. when the hallway was empty. How had he seen me? I started paying more attention to Marcus's behavior. His apartment door would open just as I was leaving mine. He'd emerge from the stairwell right when I was checking my mailbox. His timing was uncanny, like he had some internal radar for my movements. When I mentioned this to my sister during our weekly video call, she laughed. "Maybe he has a crush on you. Some guys get weird about timing when they're interested." But it didn't feel romantic. It felt calculated. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in November. I was having dinner alone, scrolling through social media, when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "The Thai place on Milwaukee is having a special tonight. Thought you might want to order in since you haven't been grocery shopping lately." I stared at the message. He was right. My refrigerator was nearly empty, and I had been planning to order takeout. But how could he possibly know about my grocery situation? I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. I walked to my kitchen window, which faced the building's courtyard. Marcus's apartment was directly across from mine, his kitchen window a perfect mirror of my layout. If he positioned himself correctly, he could see directly into my living space. I grabbed a pair of binoculars I'd bought for birdwatching and focused on his window. The lights were off, but I could make out a shape in the darkness, someone standing at the glass, looking back. Watching me watch him. I stepped away from the window and called the building's landlord, Mrs. Rodriguez. She was sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful. "Marcus has been a model tenant for 3 years. Never a single complaint. Are you sure you're not misinterpreting friendly behavior?" I wasn't sure of anything anymore. That night, I installed blackout curtains and started documenting Marcus's behavior. Every unexpected encounter, every perfectly timed text, every moment that felt too coincidental to be natural. The pattern that emerged was disturbing in its consistency. Marcus knew my schedule better than I did. He knew when I worked late, when I had client calls, when I ordered groceries, when I did laundry. He anticipated my needs because he'd been systematically observing my routines. What I'd interpreted as thoughtful neighborliness was actually the result of careful surveillance. But the real revelation came when I decided to test my theory. Asterisk, what happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. Asterisk. I started deliberately changing my patterns, doing things at random times to see how Marcus would react. I'd leave for coffee at unusual hours, work from the library instead of home, take different routes to the grocery store. The texts became more urgent. Haven't seen you around much lately. Everything okay? Noticed you missed your usual coffee run yesterday. Hope you're not sick. Your lights have been off a lot. Just checking in. He was getting anxious about losing track of me. Then I found the app. I was cleaning out my phone's storage when I noticed an application I didn't remember downloading. NeighborNet. The icon was innocuous, a little house with a Wi-Fi symbol. When I tried to open it, it requested permissions I'd never granted. Access to my location, my camera, my microphone, my contacts. I'd never installed this app. I took my phone to a tech repair shop in Lincoln Park, far from my neighborhood. The technician, a college kid named Jake, was initially skeptical. These tracking apps are usually installed by someone with physical access to your device, he explained. Like an abusive partner or a neighbor who offered to fix your Wi-Fi problems. I finished. Jake's expression grew serious as he examined the code. This isn't just location tracking. This app has been recording your conversations, accessing your camera roll, monitoring your text messages. Someone's been collecting comprehensive data about your life. My stomach dropped. Every time Marcus had helped with a tech problem, every time I'd left my phone unattended while he was in my apartment, he'd been installing monitoring software. There's more, Jake said quietly. This app connects to a larger network. You're not the only target. He showed me the data logs. The app was uploading information to a server with multiple user profiles. Women's names, ages, addresses, behavioral patterns, personal preferences, daily schedules. Marcus had been running a systematic surveillance operation on at least 12 different women across the city. I was just his most convenient subject. We contacted the police, but Detective Sarah Park was initially skeptical. Digital stalking cases are complex, she explained. We need evidence of intent to harm or harassment, not just data collection. That evidence came sooner than expected. Jake had helped me remove the tracking app and install counter-surveillance software that would alert me if someone tried to access my devices remotely. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a warning. Someone was attempting to reactivate the monitoring software. They were trying to regain access from inside my building. I called Detective Park immediately. She arrived with 2 other officers just as Marcus was knocking on my door. Emma? I haven't heard from you in a few days. Just wanted to make sure you're okay. His voice was concerned, neighborly, perfectly calibrated for anyone listening. Detective Park positioned herself where she could observe while remaining hidden. I opened the door with the chain still engaged. I'm fine, Marcus. Just busy with work. I notice your Wi-Fi's been acting up again. The signal's been inconsistent from your apartment. I could take a look if you want. There it was, the perfectly reasonable excuse to access my space and my devices. Actually, I had it fixed by a professional, I said. Thanks though. His smile faltered slightly. Oh, well, if you change your mind. I won't. For the first time since I'd known him, Marcus looked genuinely surprised. His carefully constructed persona cracked just enough to reveal something calculating underneath. Detective Park stepped into view. Marcus Rivera? We need to talk. Asterisk, this is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. Asterisk. The search of Marcus's apartment revealed the full scope of his operation. He'd converted his spare bedroom into a surveillance center with multiple monitors, high-powered cameras, and sophisticated recording equipment. Charts on the walls tracked the daily routines of women throughout the building and neighborhood. But the most disturbing discovery was his filing system. Marcus kept detailed psychological profiles on each of his targets, organized in labeled folders. My file was 3 inches thick, containing printed photographs taken through my windows, transcripts of conversations recorded by the phone app, and handwritten observations about my emotional state, my vulnerabilities, my fears. One note, dated just a week earlier, read, "Subject shows increasing isolation since move. Responds well to perceived helpfulness. Trust levels high. Ready for next phase of contact." Next phase. There had been a plan beyond just watching. Detective Park found evidence linking Marcus to at least 3 other women who'd reported feeling watched or experiencing too many coincidences, with helpful neighbors in different parts of the city. He'd been refining his technique for years, moving between apartments to establish new hunting grounds. The technical evidence was overwhelming. The psychological evidence was even worse. Marcus had been constructing detailed behavioral models of women's lives, learning their patterns and vulnerabilities with scientific precision. What he planned to do with that information became clear when they found his journal entries about optimal intervention strategies and dependency cultivation techniques. He wasn't just watching us. He was systematically breaking down our defenses, making us dependent on his help, positioning himself as the solution to problems he'd sometimes created. During questioning, Marcus remained eerily calm. He insisted he was just being a good neighbor, that the surveillance equipment was for building security, that his files were simply community notes to help him better assist residents. Even when confronted with the illegal monitoring software, he maintained his helpful facade. "I was just trying to make sure Emma felt safe in her new home. Sometimes people need more protection than they realize." The phrasing chilled me. Protection from what? From whom? Marcus was charged with multiple counts of electronic surveillance, harassment, and violation of privacy. But because he'd been careful never to make explicit threats or engage in physical stalking, the charges were relatively minor. He plea bargained down to 18 months in prison and 3 years probation. 18 months for systematically destroying women's sense of safety and privacy. I moved out of the building immediately, but the damage was done. Every helpful stranger now feels potentially dangerous. Every coincidence seems suspicious. Every act of neighborly kindness makes me wonder what information someone might be gathering, what vulnerabilities they might be cataloging. The worst part is knowing how easily I fell for it. Marcus's approach was so reasonable, so normal, so perfectly calibrated to seem harmless. He didn't lurk in shadows or make threatening gestures. He brought cookies and offered Wi-Fi passwords and remembered details about my day. He made me grateful for his attention while he systematically violated my privacy. 6 months after his arrest, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. No return address, postmarked from a different state. "Emma, I hope you understand I was only trying to help. You seemed so lonely when you moved in. I wanted to make sure you felt welcomed, protected. I still think about you sometimes, wonder how you're settling into your new place. I hope you're finding good neighbors there too. People who care enough to pay attention." The letter wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting from those detailed files. Marcus had been released early for good behavior. And somehow he knew I'd moved. The recording started at 3:17 a.m., just like all the others. I discovered the audio files buried in my phone's storage 3 weeks ago, each one exactly 43 minutes long, each one captured while I slept. The sound quality was perfect, too perfect for a phone accidentally recording in a bedroom drawer. Someone had positioned professional equipment to capture every breath, every movement, every whispered word from my dreams. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was the rain. In every recording, no matter what the weather had been that night, I could hear steady rainfall in the background. Soft, consistent, almost musical. The kind of rain that should have been soothing but instead felt like it was washing away something important, something I needed to remember. My name is Dr. Lisa Park, and I'm a sleep researcher at Northwestern University. I study the architecture of dreams, the patterns of unconscious thought, the mysterious territory between waking and sleeping. I understand the science of rest better than almost anyone. That's why I knew these recordings were impossible. I live alone in a converted loft in Wicker Park, the kind of space where every sound echoes. My bedroom has thick windows that would muffle any outside noise, and Chicago had been experiencing an unusually dry autumn. There had been no rain on the nights these recordings were made. Yet there it was, clear as conversation, the steady patter of water against glass, the distant rumble of storm drains, the soft hiss of precipitation that seemed to surround my sleeping form like a cocoon. I started simple. Changed my door locks, installed a security system, swept my apartment for hidden recording devices. Nothing. The files kept appearing on my phone every few days, always the same length, always accompanied by that impossible rain. I took my phone to 3 different tech specialists. Each one confirmed the same thing: the recordings were being created locally, by my device's own microphone, while I slept. No evidence of remote access, no malware, no external interference. Your phone is recording you, the last technician explained. But only you. No one else has access to these files. They're being generated and stored entirely on your device. He paused, looking uncomfortable. Dr. Park, have you considered that you might be creating these recordings yourself? The suggestion was absurd. I'm a rational person, a scientist. I don't sleepwalk, don't talk in my sleep, certainly don't operate complex recording equipment while unconscious. But I couldn't explain the files any other way. That night, I decided to stay awake and observe. I positioned myself in my living room with a clear view of my bedroom, armed with coffee and determination. If someone was entering my apartment to make these recordings, I would catch them in the act. At 3:17 a.m., my phone's recording app activated by itself. I watched the screen light up, watched the audio levels begin fluctuating, watched the timer start counting. But my apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic on Milwaukee Avenue. No rain. No sound that could account for what the phone was allegedly capturing. I crept closer to observe the waveform display. The audio levels showed consistent environmental noise, exactly what you'd expect from rainfall against windows. But I was hearing nothing except my own heartbeat and the soft whistle of wind through the building's ventilation system. The recording continued for exactly 43 minutes, then stopped as mysteriously as it had begun. When I played back the file the next morning, there it was again, my sleeping breath accompanied by steady rain that had never fallen. I started keeping detailed logs. Weather reports, sleep patterns, the exact content of each recording. What I found challenged everything I thought I knew about consciousness and memory. The rain wasn't random. It corresponded to specific patterns in my sleep cycle, intensifying during REM phases when dreaming is most active. More disturbing still, when I listened closely to the rainfall, I could hear variations, changes in intensity and rhythm that seemed to match my emotional state during the previous day. Heavy downpours after stressful workdays. Gentle showers following peaceful evenings. The rain was somehow connected to my psychological state, manifesting in recordings that shouldn't exist. But the real breakthrough came when I started recognizing voices in the rainfall. At first, they were barely audible, whispers that could have been wind or imagination. But as I enhanced the audio using professional equipment from my lab, the voices became clear. Conversations I'd had years ago, fragments of memories I'd forgotten, words spoken by people who were no longer in my life. My mother's voice, discussing my childhood fears during a therapy session when I was 12. My college roommate, describing her concerns about my obsessive research habits. My ex-husband, explaining to someone why our marriage had failed. All of these conversations were embedded in the sound of rain that had never fallen, preserved in recordings that defied explanation. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. I became obsessed with understanding the phenomenon. Sleep became secondary to analysis, meals forgotten in favor of audio enhancement, social connections abandoned for the solitary work of decoding impossible recordings. The voices in the rain were telling a story, my story, but from perspectives I'd never considered. They revealed secrets I'd forgotten, moments I'd repressed, truths about myself that I'd spent years avoiding. In one recording, I heard my graduate advisor discussing my concerning inability to distinguish between objective research and personal projection. In another, my sister explained to her husband why she'd stopped calling me. Lisa lives in her head so much, I'm not sure she remembers the rest of us exist. The rain was becoming a confession booth for everyone who'd ever worried about my mental state. I started staying awake for days at a time, monitoring the recordings in real time, trying to understand the mechanism behind their creation. Sleep deprivation made the boundaries between reality and research blur. I found myself talking to the recordings, arguing with voices from my past, defending decisions I'd made years ago. During one particularly intense session, I realized I was no longer just listening to the rain, I was participating in it. My own voice had joined the chorus, offering commentary on the conversations, providing context for memories I'd thought were private. I was somehow narrating my own psychological excavation while unconscious, creating a dialogue between my sleeping and waking selves. The discovery should have been fascinating from a research perspective. Instead, it terrified me. I was losing track of which thoughts were current, and which were echoes from the recordings. Conversations with colleagues became confusing because I couldn't remember if I'd actually spoken to them, or just heard their voices in the impossible rain. My department chair, Dr. Martinez, called me into his office after I'd missed 3 consecutive faculty meetings. "Lisa, people are concerned about you. You look exhausted. Your research presentation last week was incomprehensible, and several students have complained that you're discussing their personal lives in ways that make them uncomfortable." I tried to explain about the recordings, about the voices in the rain, about the breakthrough research potential of unconscious audio documentation. He listened patiently, then suggested I take a medical leave to address what he diplomatically called work-related stress. That night, I made a decision that changed everything. Instead of trying to prevent the recordings, I would embrace them. I set up professional-grade audio equipment throughout my apartment, positioned cameras to capture any physical activity during the recording periods, and prepared to document whatever was happening to me with scientific rigor. At 3:17 a.m., the familiar activation began. But this time, I was ready. The high-quality equipment revealed layers of sound I'd never noticed before. Beneath the rain and voices, there was something else, a low, rhythmic pulsing that matched the frequency of brain waves during deep sleep. And for the first time, I saw myself in the camera footage. I was sitting up in bed, eyes closed, speaking in a steady whisper that synchronized perfectly with the rhythm of the impossible rain. I was the source of all the voices, all the conversations, all the memories embedded in the phantom precipitation. My sleeping self was somehow accessing and vocalizing every interaction I'd ever had, every conversation I'd ever overheard, every moment when someone had expressed concern about my psychological state. The rain was just my unconscious mind's way of organizing the flood of forgotten voices that had been accumulating for years. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. I watched 3 weeks of footage, documenting my nightly performances with clinical fascination and growing horror. Each recording session was a complete psychological autopsy, performed by my sleeping self with surgical precision. I would recite conversations verbatim, complete with accurate voice impressions of family members, colleagues, and strangers who'd commented on my behavior over the years. My unconscious mind had been cataloging every expression of concern, every whispered worry, every moment when someone had questioned my grip on reality. The rain sound was created by my own breath, modulated through techniques I didn't consciously know I possessed. My sleeping self had developed sophisticated vocal skills to create the illusion of environmental audio while performing this nightly psychological excavation. But the most disturbing discovery came when I found recordings that predated my awareness of the phenomenon by months. My unconscious midnight confessions had been happening for over a year, gradually increasing in frequency and complexity. The voices had grown more detailed, the conversations more extensive, the rain more convincing as my sleeping self perfected its technique. I had been psychologically unraveling for months without realizing it, creating elaborate audio evidence of my deteriorating mental state, while believing myself to be a stable, rational researcher. The final revelation came when I discovered that my phone hadn't been creating the recordings at all. The files were being generated by a sophisticated sleep talk recording app I'd downloaded and forgotten about during a period of insomnia research. The app was designed to capture unconscious vocalizations for analysis, but my case had exceeded its parameters. Instead of simple sleep talking, I'd been conducting full psychological sessions with myself, channeling years of suppressed awareness about how others perceived my increasingly obsessive behavior. The rain, the voices, the impossible conversations, they were all products of my own mind, finally giving voice to truths I'd been unable to face while awake. Dr. Martinez was right. My colleagues were right. My family had been right to worry. I'd been losing touch with reality gradually, so gradually that I hadn't noticed the transition from researcher to subject, from observer to observed. The treatment is helping, they tell me. The medication is stabilizing my sleep patterns, and the therapy is addressing what my psychiatrist calls research-induced dissociation with auditory processing complications. I'm learning to distinguish between memories and reconstructions, between actual conversations and internalized criticisms. The nightly recordings have stopped, replaced by peaceful, silent sleep. But sometimes, during the quiet hours before dawn, I still hear it. The soft patter of rain against windows that never get wet, carrying voices of people who tried to help me before I retreated so far into my own mind that I forgot they were real. The rain always knows what we're trying not to remember. And on nights when the weather forecast calls for storms, I find myself wondering, what if the recordings were never just in my head? What if the rain really was trying to tell me something I needed to hear? I sleep with earplugs now, just in case. The grocery store cashier knew my name before I handed her my credit card. "Have a good day, Mr. Thompson," she said with that practiced retail smile, bagging my frozen dinners and instant coffee. I stared at her name tag, Jessica, trying to remember if we'd met before. We hadn't. I was certain of it. But she knew me. This started happening 3 weeks ago, right after I moved to Millbrook, a small town outside Portland where nobody should know anybody named David Thompson. I'd chosen this place specifically for its anonymity, a fresh start after the bankruptcy, the divorce, the complete collapse of everything I'd built in my previous life. Yet somehow, I'd become a familiar face to people I'd never seen before. The barista at the coffee shop always had my order ready, medium dark roast, no sugar, even though I'd never told anyone my preference. The mailman waved like we were old friends. Mrs. Henderson from down the street brought me casseroles and asked about my recovery, as if she knew details about my life that I hadn't shared with anyone. I began keeping a journal, documenting each incident. The pattern was consistent but impossible. Every person I encountered seemed to have prior knowledge of David Thompson, complete with personal details about my habits, my history, even my emotional state. But David Thompson had never lived in Millbrook before 3 weeks ago. I'd rented the small house on Maple Street through an online service, signed the lease electronically, moved in without meeting anyone face to face. I'd been careful to leave no digital trail leading from my old life in Seattle to this new beginning. David Thompson was supposed to be a blank slate. Instead, he appeared to be a well-established member of the community. The breaking point came when I visited the local library to use their internet. The librarian, an elderly woman named Margaret, looked up from her desk with genuine concern. "David, honey, you look better today. I was worried about you last week when you seemed so upset about the anniversary." "Anniversary? What anniversary?" "I'm sorry, but I think you have me confused with someone else," I said carefully. Margaret's expression shifted to confusion, then something approaching fear. "David Thompson, right? From Maple Street? You've been coming here every Tuesday for the past 6 months, always sitting at the same table, always reading those psychology books." 6 months. I'd been in town for 3 weeks. "You told me about your daughter," she continued, her voice becoming uncertain. "About the accident, About why you moved here to heal. I don't have a daughter. I've never been married long enough to have children. That evening, I called the real estate agency that had arranged my lease. The agent, Mrs. Rodriguez, was pleasant but confused by my questions. Mr. Thompson, you've been an excellent tenant. Always pays on time, very quiet. Mrs. Patterson, the previous owner, mentioned you were exactly the kind of renter she hoped for when she decided to move to Florida. How long has David Thompson been renting this house? Well, let me check. It shows here that you signed the initial lease in March. So about 8 months now. March. It was currently October. I'd signed my lease 3 weeks ago, in late September. There must be some mistake in your records, I said. No mistake, Mr. Thompson. I have your signed lease right here, dated March 15th. Your references were impeccable. Your previous landlord in Seattle spoke very highly of you. She was describing a lease I'd never signed for a house I'd never seen, using references from a life I was trying to leave behind. I spent the next day visiting every business in town, conducting an informal investigation into David Thompson's local history. What I discovered was comprehensive and terrifying. At the hardware store, Bob remembered selling me paint for the kitchen renovation in May. The pharmacist had records of prescriptions I'd never filled for conditions I didn't have. The bank teller recalled helping me set up a savings account with an initial deposit I'd never made. Everyone had detailed, consistent memories of a David Thompson who'd been living my life better than I was living it myself. This other David was well-liked, helpful to neighbors, recovering from some unspecified tragedy involving a daughter. He was making progress, people said. Finding peace. Building a new life after something terrible had happened. But I wasn't that David Thompson. I was a failed businessman hiding from creditors and trying to disappear. I had no daughter, no tragedy beyond my own poor choices and spectacular failures. I was ordinary, forgettable, desperate, not someone worthy of a community's concern and support. Yet somehow, a better version of me had been living in Millbrook for months, establishing relationships and earning respect while I was still trapped in my old life hundreds of miles away. Asterisk, what happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. Asterisk. I decided to play along with the charade while investigating further. If everyone expected David Thompson to behave a certain way, I would meet those expectations and see where the deception led. I started visiting the library every Tuesday, sitting at my usual table. Margaret would nod approvingly, and sometimes bring me books she thought I'd enjoy, always psychology texts or grief counseling guides. I pretended to recognize them, thanked her for her thoughtfulness. At the coffee shop, I let them prepare my usual order without correcting them. The barista, a college student named Amy, would sometimes ask how I was, adjusting, and if the therapy was helping. I gave vague, positive responses that seemed to satisfy her. Slowly, I began piecing together the life of the other David Thompson. He was a widower whose daughter had died in a car accident, an accident he somehow blamed himself for. He'd moved to Millbrook to escape the memories and start over. He was seeing a therapist, Dr. Sarah Chin, every other Thursday. He volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends. He was learning to cook, trying to eat healthier, taking long walks to clear his head. He was everything I wasn't: responsible, recovering, genuinely trying to heal from legitimate trauma rather than just running from the consequences of his own mistakes. I found Dr. Chen's office listed in the phone directory. On a Thursday afternoon, I called to schedule an appointment. "David," the receptionist said warmly, "you're not scheduled until next week. Is everything all right? I wanted to move up my appointment if possible." "Of course. Dr. Chen had a cancellation tomorrow at 2 p.m. Should I put you down for your regular session length?" "Regular session length." I agreed and hung up, my hands shaking. The therapy office was in a converted Victorian house downtown. I arrived early, unsure what to expect. Dr. Chen greeted me in the waiting room, a kind-faced woman in her 50s who looked at me with the familiarity of someone who'd been helping me work through my problems for months. "You look different today, David. Lighter somehow." I sat in the leather chair across from her desk, noting how my body seemed to know exactly how to position itself. This was clearly a familiar space. "I've been thinking about our last conversation," she said, consulting notes I couldn't see. "About your guilt regarding Emma's accident. You seemed ready to start forgiving yourself." Emma. The daughter I'd never had. "Tell me about Emma," I said carefully. Dr. Chen looked surprised. "David, we've been discussing Emma for 6 months. She was your everything, your daughter, your reason for getting up every morning after Linda passed. The accident wasn't your fault, remember? We've talked about this extensively." I nodded, letting her continue. "You've made remarkable progress since March. When you first came here, you could barely function. Now you're engaging with the community, helping others, building a new life. Emma would be proud of the man you're becoming." For the next hour, Dr. Chen walked me through months of therapy sessions I'd never attended, describing my psychological journey from devastating grief to gradual healing. She showed me artwork I'd supposedly created, journal entries I'd never written, breakthrough moments I'd never experienced. According to her detailed notes, David Thompson had been systematically rebuilding his life after losing everything that mattered to him. He was succeeding. I was failing at being myself, but apparently excelling at being someone else. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. That night, I tore through every document in the house, searching for evidence of the other David Thompson's presence. In the bedroom closet, I found clothes that fit me perfectly but weren't mine. In the kitchen, I discovered a recipe collection written in handwriting that looked like mine but contained dishes I'd never cooked. In the back of a desk drawer, I found a photo album. The pictures showed a man who looked exactly like me, but whose life I didn't recognize. David Thompson with a beautiful woman I'd never met, presumably Linda. David Thompson holding a laughing little girl, Emma. David Thompson at birthday parties, graduations, family vacations, Christmas mornings. A complete life documented in photographs I'd never posed for, with people I'd never met, in places I'd never been. The final photo was a newspaper clipping. "Local father and daughter killed in highway accident." The accompanying article described how David Thompson, 34, and his daughter Emma, 8, had died when their car was struck by a truck during a rainstorm last March. The same month I'd supposedly signed my lease in Millbrook. I stared at the obituary photo, my face, but not my life. My name, but not my story. David Thompson had died in March. I had arrived in October, somehow inheriting his identity, his relationships, his entire existence in this small town where people remembered a man who no longer existed. But if David Thompson was dead, then who was I? I ran to the bathroom mirror, studying my reflection with desperate intensity. The face looking back was mine, I was certain of it. My scars, my slightly crooked nose from a childhood fall, my father's eyes. I was David Thompson from Seattle, the failed businessman, the divorced loner. But David Thompson from Seattle had no record of existing before 6 months ago. I spent the rest of the night searching online for any trace of my previous life. The business I'd owned, the apartment I'd rented, the wife I'd divorced, none of it appeared in any database or search result. Even my bankruptcy filing had vanished from public records. The only David Thompson who existed was the one who had died with his daughter in March, and the one who had somehow inherited his life in October. I called my ex-wife's number from memory. Disconnected. Searched for her on social media. No results. Tried to contact my former business partners, employees, anyone who could confirm my existence. Nothing. By morning, I had to face the impossible truth. I had no verifiable history before arriving in Millbrook 3 weeks ago. No documentation, no relationships, no evidence that I had ever lived anywhere else or been anyone else. I was David Thompson, the grieving father who had died in a car accident, and somehow continued existing in the form of a stranger who perfectly matched his appearance, and desperately needed his life. The rain started falling as I sat in the kitchen, surrounded by photographs of a family I'd never had and documents proving a life I'd never lived. I listened to the water hitting the windows and realized that the sound was familiar, not from Seattle, where I'd supposedly lived for years, but from the night Emma and her father had died. The night I had become David Thompson. I still live in the house on Maple Street. The community continues to support my recovery, proud of the progress I've made since the tragedy. Dr. Chen says I'm her greatest success story, a man who lost everything and found a way to keep living. Sometimes I remember Seattle, the failed business, the divorce that left me with nothing. But those memories feel distant now, like stories someone told me about a person I used to know. Other times I remember Linda's laugh, Emma's favorite bedtime story, the way my daughter would fall asleep holding my hand during thunderstorms. These memories feel real, immediate, mine. I don't know which David Thompson I really am. But I know that every night when it rains I can hear Emma calling for her daddy, and I always answer. Because someone has to. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.